Forgive me. Hey, CPAC. You know, everybody says it's great to be back at CPAC, but nobody means it like I do. I'm here to talk about one other piece of this story about the Chinese communists that complements and unfortunately brings here at home the threat that we're facing. I'm going to try to go through this by reading a couple of things to you in the space of the 4 or 5 minutes that I have left to tell you about all of the things that China is doing to threaten you, threaten all of us. Let me start by just making an observation. For almost 20 years now, Communist China has been implementing a strategy of its own towards the United States. It was described in a book published in 1999 by two People's Liberation Army colonels entitled Unrestricted Warfare. So when my friend Steve Moore talks about us having an adversary in China, and John Bolton describes the kind of military activities that they've been engaged in, let me just set something straight. We're dealing with an enemy that is at war with this country, unrestricted warfare. Here's some examples. They're manipulating their currency. They're seeking to take down ours as the reserve currency of the world. They're trying to buy into the Chicago Stock Exchange so that they can more effectively manipulate our financial sector. They are engaged in cyber warfare, not just against, our companies, though heavens knows that's happening, including, by the way, all of our defense contractors, whose intellectual property, much of which you've paid for to try to protect us, is being ripped off by the Chinese communists. Financial warfare. I mentioned the stock exchange, but that's only a piece of it. They're putting into place, ladies and gentlemen, all of the ingredients that they need to basically supplant the kinds of financial institutions that we built in the immediate post-World War II period. That is a building block for economic as well as financial warfare against us. You've perhaps heard of quantum computing. The Chinese are considered to be in advance of us in that respect, which will give them an ability to have codes that cannot be broken and easy ability to break ours, among many, many other applications. They are cornering the market, if they haven't already, on things like rare earth minerals and the sorts of products that are essential to our agricultural system. For example, phosphorus and potassium. These are things that are absolutely indispensable, not just to our economy, but also to our supply of food, our survival, indeed. Chinese nationals in this country, not all of them, of course, but many of them are induced to engage in espionage, an enormous force multiplier for those that are officially doing it for their government. About 80% of the U.S. electronics market is now supplied by China. Imagine that. This means, among other things, that cameras that we use for all kinds of home monitoring and other surveillance, official, government, state, even national security, are being compromised because they are supplied to us by China. You don't think they're taking advantage of that? Of course they are. Talk about the Internet of Things. The Chinese are in a position to not only exploit all of the information flows that will operate on that system of internet-dependent wireless communications, for everything from your refrigerator to your car. They will be able to operate against them, perhaps even to use them to kill us by driving that self-driving car off the road, for example. They're buying up our technology companies. They're not just stealing their intellectual property. The so-called watchdogs, CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, the people who let that Uranium One deal go, by the way, are pretty much asleep at the switch. High time we reform that. Electromagnetic pulse is one of the instruments of unrestricted warfare that the Chinese are prepared to engage in against us. They are also working on choke points around the world to try to make sure that they can influence, if not simply cut off, our ability to use the world's oceans for trade, as well as for our national security. Hardly an all-inclusive or exhaustive list, but a sample of what unrestricted warfare means to you. So let me give you 3 calls to action that the President of the United States and our government must do about this. 1, be aware that the Chinese are enemies, that they are at war with us, have been for almost 20 years at least, and respond appropriately. My own view, my friend John Bolton, I think, alluded to President Reagan, who I had the privilege of serving along with him, had a strategy for destroying the Soviet Union. We need one like it. Look at National Security Decision Directive 75, which President Reagan used to do that. We must implement it now. I say regime change in China. And last, but hardly least, the President of the United States must fire H.R. McMaster and hire John Bolton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank, for all you've done.
Thank you, my friend.